Okay, well, it's really good to see you all. Those of you who are online, and obviously in the future, hopefully those will be watching this. Thank you again for supporting us in getting the message of unconditional love around the world. I really do appreciate all Patreon supporters and everything you do to help us. I believe we're all part of this great love awakening, and we're coming to realize who God really is and who we really are as his sons, as his children. And I would encourage you to get a look at the Grace Awakening Network on Roku if you can. It's got a really good lot of content on there. It's all free, because we are in a love awakening, a grace awakening, joy awakening, peace awakening, a true God awakening. And the world is beginning to awaken, not necessarily the church, but the world. And those who are within the church open to pursue something deep inside that's calling them, wooing them to embrace it. So I encourage everyone to embrace these awakenings. Don't hold back. Um, Building on the foundation of unconditional love, in this new series, I'm going to share the journey that led to my restoration of my first love relationship with the Father. That enabled me to discover my own identity as a son of God. And I will reiterate this point that I made last time, because there have been a number of comments that I've seen online about people struggle to be called a son or a bride and a wife, depending on your gender. There is no gender attached to the term son, daughter, male, female, bride, wife, husband within what I'm sharing. Within a natural setting, of course there is. But in terms of God and how God views us, we're all sons from the perspective that God sees it. Now, of course, we may be a female or male from a natural perspective, but that shouldn't stop us embracing what actually sonship means, what being a wife or a bride or any of those things mean. Um, we should not be offended or feel awkward at being described as a bride, wife, or son. We're all children of God, regardless of our physical gender, and our identity is in our origin in God, and we discover that in first love. Sonship is an issue of identity in relationship and positional governmental authority in co-heirship with Jesus, the Son of God. That's why I use the word sonship, and I don't differentiate between sons and daughters, because it's a position that we have in co-heirship with Jesus. And that is really all there is to it. There should really be no need to have a problem with being called a son, or if you're a female, or being called a bride or a wife if you're a male, because it's not relating to gender at all. And I think for those who may struggle being identified with male or female, in the opposite to what they really are, you know, it's like, ask God to show you what causes that trigger. Maybe there's an insecurity there within your own identity, and God can bring you that security and bring a revelation of that truth. Since we last met, I've found a number of online quotes that I want to throw out there for you. There's a couple by Don Keathley, who is the Grace Awakening Network sort of coordinator. Not one single person on the planet is in Adam. If you're in Adam, then Jesus was not the last Adam. I don't care what they told you down at the church house. You know, we are new creations in Jesus. We need our minds renewed to that fact, because it is a fact, but we may not come into that realization yet. Another one, Jesus did not come to punch your ticket for heaven one day. Jesus came to give you the doorway into full union with the Father through the Son now, today, in this world. And I think that full union is really what I'm looking for us to discover in restoring first love, restoring that place of union, which is the place of first love. That is our origin. That reveals the union we had in the beginning. And I think that's the key. We had that in the beginning, and God wants to restore us back to where we once were and will be again. This quote is by Luke Agee. Revelations are actually memories from your spirit that you forgot you knew, entering from your heart into your soul and mind. So again, discovering our origin in first love can restore those memories. Yeah, I had many experiences where I remembered and began to engage who I was before I was here and what I was doing before I was here. And that helped me outwork my full identity in this realm. There's a really good scripture in Titus 1:2. In the Mirror Bible, it says, "This is the life of the ages, which was anticipated for generations." So in other words, all prophetic expectation was looking forward to where we are now, the life of our original design, announced by the infallible resolve of God before time and space existed. So God, even before anything came into existence, had already had our original design within his heart, and mankind's union with God is the original thought that inspired creation. And I really like that quote. Mankind's union with God is the original thought that inspired creation. And his desire for union and relationship with us was why he created everything in the first place, to establish a place where that relationship could outwork. Galatians 2:20, again in the Mirror Bible. "So here I am, dead and alive at the same time. I'm dead to the old me. I was trying to be," and that's really a key there. I was trying to be something and trying to be someone through my own efforts that was never going to succeed. It says, "I'm dead to the old me I was trying to be and alive to the real me, which is Christ in me." There was always this sense of union that God desired. Co-crucified, now co-alive. What a glorious entanglement. And again, I love that. And a glorious entanglement. You could think of that from a quantum physics perspective in terms of quantum entanglement, but you could also think of it as relational and interactive and interconnected and in a union with him. I was in him in his death. Now he is in me in my life. For the first time, I'm free to be me in my skin, immersed in his faith, in our joint sonship. He loves me and believes in me. He is God's gift to me. And that is, again, a wonderful statement, in our joint sonship. And that is what sonship is, in our joint sonship. And that is how the Bible describes it, because it's a positional relationship, nothing to do with male and female there. Now, in the Passion Translation, Galatians 2:20, "My old identity has been co-crucified with Christ and no longer lives. And now the essence of this new life is no longer mine, for the Anointed One lives his life through me. We live in union as one." Again, the concept of living in this union of relationship. My new life is empowered by the faith of the Son of God, who loves me so much that he gave himself for me, dispensing his life into mine. And again, that's what we're looking to discover and experience, him in us, the hope of glory, in us, a revelation that has been poured into our hearts through the Spirit of God's present in me. What Jesus was describing would happen after the resurrection, that we would know that he's in us and we're in this relationship with him in the Father. And he's dispensing that. That is flowing through me, into me, through me, and around me all the time, if I can cooperate with what he's doing and come into agreement with it in the union of our hearts and minds and beings. So this is a quote from about that scripture that I found. "We live in union with the divine one, Jesus Christ, as my new life is empowered by the faith of the Son of God." Now, see, the faith of the Son of God, not in. See, if it's all to do with our faith in the Son of God, then it's to do with our faith. And it very clearly says we're saved by grace through faith, and that is not our own. It's a gift that's been given. So it's his faith that I'm living in, who loves me so much that he gave himself for me and dispenses his life into mine. Our new nature is now a divine union. That is the reality. It's a new divine nature. We really must become awakened to live from this reality. Jesus is resetting us from unbelief to knowing with a certainty so we can believe and experience everything Jesus says as a matter of fact. May our entire internal world realign to this truth. Settle to this truth with an absolute knowing, complete certainty, and trust in Jesus' every word that he says. And not just what he says, but who he is in us as the living word of God. Because Jesus is the word that became flesh. Jesus was the word, and the word was with God in the beginning. And that is our origin within that living word. So we can live from the strength of our union. He lives in me. We live from that place, a place of restoration, being a new creation, him in me and me in him. We live within I am, that I am in a perichoresis love relationship. And I'll go into that a little bit more. So what do you think that looks like? What would it mean for you? And the quote from a lady called Angela Micchio Paris is, I ponder on this verse often. And I think it's worth pondering on. It's worth meditating on. What is it like to be in union? What is it like to be a new creation reality? And I believe many people are awakening to the possibility of this union. It is a now message that God is releasing for us to discover. Another quote, the absence of your full identity, your full potential leaves a hole in this world. Now think about that. The absence of your full identity, your full potential leaves a hole in this world, because this world needs you. You were created for this time, for this purpose, within relationship with God, for creation. Don't settle for good enough or feeling better. You're incredible, regardless of what you believe. Your true self, your full identity is so powerful and so needed right now. Go through the difficulty, dark night of the soul, deconstruction, etc., and don't hold back. Welcome it, embrace it, and accelerate it. This world needs you, the full you. Yes, I'm talking to you. And that was Martin Smith. Now, the key in this is to be willing to embrace going through whatever it takes to bring us to that reality of who we fully are. That means a whole deconstruction of our thinking, maybe our belief systems, maybe what we feel about ourselves. But if we welcome it and embrace it, it can accelerate. If we resist it, it can obviously take longer. So I encourage everyone, don't hold back. Wholeheartedly allow God to take you on the journey that will bring you into your full identity, because you are truly needed. Now, we are tripart beings made in the image of God to be in union with Father, Son, and Spirit. We have gateways that connect our spirit, soul, and body that facilitate the flow of abundant life within us. And most of you will probably be familiar with the gateway diagrams. We have a gateway diagram, and it will be in the notes attached to this. And usually it is 4 concentric circles, one inside the other, inside the other, inside the other. And they represent body, soul, spirit, and the glory of God, that place of first love within the center of our spirit. Now, the body is how we experience world consciousness. We can have the gates of our body, the senses, 5 physical senses, our eye gate, nose gate, ear gate, mouth gate, feel gate. There are senses, and they're designed to help us interact with the world, but they're not designed to interpret what we experience in the world from the outside in without spiritual discernment. If we just go with what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste or touch, those things can deceive us if they're not interpreted in the right way. Now, our soul is our self-consciousness, how we become self-aware and conscious of who we are. Now, again, the soul has functions that help with our self-consciousness, but they're not designed to be operating from the information that comes from the outside in. and they're not designed to operate independently of the revelation that comes from the relationship of God within the spirit. But the soul gates, conscience, reason, imagination, mind, unconscious, subconscious, conscious, emotions, choice, and will, if operating independently, can lead to total independence and the creating of our own identity through what we do and from the programming that we've received through the world. Then we have our spirit that has also abilities or senses, gates, that are supposed to interact together with what flows from the place of first love where God's glory resides within. That is the place where the river of life, where the life energy, where spirit flows to touch through the different senses of the spirit, to touch the soul, to engage with our whole being, so that we are aware only of the world through the reference point of viewing it through the spirit. Now, that's what Adam started like. He started only experiencing the physical world and realm through the discernment of the spirit, because he was clothed with the spiritual glory of his identity in relationship with God, because they were in that union of relationship. Now, when we have now the state where everything internalized, rather than having a walking relationship with God in the garden, now God's presence is within our spirit. Our spirit is within our body, and our body relates to the world. Now, that is the picture that you get from these 4 concentric circles. But actually, that is not the full picture and not the full reality. It's helpful to help us understand that there is an interaction. We have spirit gates, our communication gate or prayer gate, fear of God gate, which is not being afraid of God, but having a sense of awe and relationship with him, intuition, revelation, worship, hope, faith, reverence. And each of them relates to the soul gates. So reverence and fear of God engage our conscience. The other communication can come through intuition or revelation. And we have this sense of worship in which our relationship with God helps us to engage the world around us from a perspective of, like Jesus, only doing what we see the Father doing. But there is more to it than this. Our soul has also been endued with redemptive gifts by God. There are 7 redemptive gifts: prophet, teacher, ruler, exhorter, servant, giver, mercy. Now, don't think of the spiritual gifts. These aren't spiritual gifts that we've been given by the Spirit. These were endued by God into our soul, into our personality. Each of us will have a dominant gift or gifts. My predominant gifts are prophet, teacher, but I've learned to rule, so I have a high ruler ability. Some of the others, I may operate in exhorter. At times, I may operate in servant or giver. And mercy. But ultimately, this is how we engage the world around us. They're how we're wired to interact with and perceive everything that we experience. Now, if, as God intended in the beginning, they are part of our spiritual identity with the spirit and soul functioning together, that works really well. But if they operate independently, even though they may be instinctively how we act and think, they can be part of our identity, but we might use them as works to create our own self-independence. So we operate independently of the source of these gifts and for the purpose of these gifts, and we may use them selfishly. And God wants to restore us so these gifts are fully functioning. And I believe the more we're in union, the more each of the gifts actually is functioning within us, and we become more rounded, if you like, rather than just relying on 1 or 2. So we learn by relating to God that he functions in all 7 of those. So our self-awareness has been programmed by the world from outside inwards through life's experiences. And we may have a lot of good experiences, which may help us. We may have had a lot of bad experiences in life, which have programmed us, shaped us, maybe through trauma, or maybe through the programming of religion, or through education, or through our upbringing, to look at ourselves in a particular way. We need to reconnect with our true spiritual identity, which flows from inside out. It's never intended to get our identity from our experiences outside inwards, but inside out. So our spiritual identity, which only comes in the union with Father, Son, and Spirit, actually begins to shape how we see ourselves, feel about ourselves, and engage with the world. First love is part of that experience and is a key to that. And it's really important that we engage in the relationship that reveals our true identity in sonship. So we are a union of spirit, soul, and body, and that is being restored by love from our true origin. The soul ties from the outside in need to be severed, reconnected from spirit to soul, so that we can be reintegrated and made whole. And when this happened to me, everything changes. This was one of the most life-changing experiences that I had, when my spirit started to direct and lead my soul into relationship, and my soul stopped operating independently. Now, this was something that God did in me when I surrendered and allowed him to do it. Before that, I was fighting for my independence. Even though I was doing that, I thought the things God wanted me to do, my motives were not pure in doing them, because they were still giving me a sense of identity and purpose, rather than getting that identity and purpose from God himself. So the process of going through this, of having our ties disconnected, severed, this is the separation of soul and spirit. But we're not supposed to be separate. We're supposed to be in union. So we've got to be reintegrated. A lot of people think their soul is lesser than their spirit, and their body, really, that's the sort of the lesser of the three. In reality, they're equal value to God and should be to us. And when we operate in an equal value in that sense, we will begin to fully express who we are. It is a difficult process. And if we don't learn to trust and surrender God in it, we can resist it, and it can take longer. And I think I would encourage anyone to be proactive in seeking God for the separation of soul and spirit and their reintegration. So rather than the two-dimensional perspective of four concentric circles, we are connected, I believe, more like three spheres. And the spheres are spirit, soul, and body, and those spheres are overlapping and connecting with each other. And if you think about how that looks, and again, I put a diagram in the notes, the spirit and the soul overlap, the spirit and the body overlap, the soul and the body overlap, but there is a place, our innermost being, where spirit, soul, and body are connected. And that is our core innermost place, where the union with Father, Son, and Spirit takes place. Now, our first gate, our first love gate, is within our spirit. But because it's connected to the soul, there can be a flow of life from spirit to soul. And God, who is within our spirit, can, if we choose to allow him, fill our soul. We start intimacy in that place of first love by opening the gate, but it spreads through our soul to our very core, and that becomes the center of our being. The source comes from the spirit, the river of life, presence of God, whichever way you want to put it. Our innermost being is where we are in union with Father, Son, and Spirit, and heaven connects to earth in the Merkaba within our core being, and we are connected to heaven and lots of other places, because the connection we have from spirit to soul is a quantum entanglement, which enables our spirit to be anywhere, but still connected to our soul and instantly in relationship. Now, at the core of in our spirit, we have the glory of God's presence within this first love gateway. And there is an area where God dwells within all of us, with all mankind. But that gateway often is closed. And what is coming from that gate is a trickle under the threshold of the gate. like in the temple, which is described in Ezekiel, which had a flow, a trickle, but then it began to get deeper, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, until it was completely out of our depths. And this is what God would like us to be, absolutely, completely filled with his presence, saturated with love, saturated with life. But we have the choice to open that gate. And that becomes a choice which we can take every single day. And my experience with this was where I really first began to get to know God in a deeper way. Every day I would choose to open that first love gate. God's presence, maybe Father, Son, Spirit, or all three, would embrace me. And I would receive that hug and would then begin to go wherever led. And that flow often took me into my soul. Originally, when I looked at these soul gates and body gates and spirit gates, I walked with Jesus to each gate, asked him to help me understand how I function, who I am. Because, you know, we're all different and we're all uniquely made and we function differently. So their interaction between these different gateways are unique. No one is exactly the same. So I walked through the gates. I learned to understand myself. I learned to understand why they were blocked and why there might not be a flow. You know, for some people, when they first start to engage this sort of place of first love, it can appear like that first love gate is absolutely, completely chained up, locked. You can't open it. It's, some people have described seeing it covered with brambles, inaccessible. They just couldn't open it. Now, the reality is that is not the truth. That is a deception of the soul by projecting that image onto that first love gate because of fear, because of trauma, because of other reasons why we might be afraid of intimacy, or why we might be afraid to let go of control and invite God to be God in us. So there are reasons why that might be, but in reality, they're not true. Even though they might be our perspective and we might struggle with opening that gateway, the fact is we have the choice because the handle is on our side. There isn't a handle on the other side. There is just handles on the side that we can choose to open it. So the first love gate, when opened, releases an increasing flow of life. It goes beyond a trickle. Most of us have lived on a trickle for most of our lives. We want it to be an absolute flood. That flood can energize us at the core of our being. It can energize us within the energy gates through the Merkaba, and we can have unlimited energy, which leads to, as we've seen before, immortal life. Now, the river of life flows from heaven through our first love gate to our soul and body. That river flows from spirit to the garden of our heart, facilitates our experiences of the dance floor, soaking room, bridal chamber. And I will go into all of those experiences during this series so that we can all learn to encounter God and discover that place of first love and what God desires us to know and experience about who we really are as his children. Now, my experiences on the journey to discover that origin and discover my true identity were related both to the Hebrew marriage process, which I will explain, and encountering four rivers equating to the four chambers of the heart. Now, I'm not talking about a literal thing here. Yeah, my heart does have four chambers, but it's not talking about the literal four chambers. But there is a principle where life, where things flow around my body, they flow from the chambers of my heart through the different blood vessels to bring life and energy around my whole body. And the same is true of the spirit, and the same is true of us exploring and engaging our true identity. So we can engage the garden and the dance floor and the soaking room and the bridal chamber as places of engagement that are represented by the four chambers of the heart. And the process is representative of marriage and relationship. And therefore, the processes of Hebrew marriage were lakah, segula, mikvah, ketubah, and huppah. And at the end of all that, there would have been consummation. Now, just briefly, because I will go into this again when we look to encounter it, lakah is the stage of the relationship where God declares, I want to make you mine. This is a declaration of his intent for intimacy and relationship. The segula, the stage of the relationship where God actually declares, not only do I want to make you mine, but you are my treasured possession. You are the apple of my eye. You are the most important person in the world to me. And he would say that of everybody, not just me or you, but everyone, because that is his desire, that everyone would come into the knowledge of that, to know how special you really are, that you are treasured. But often we don't believe that because of experiences of life. And God needs to encounter us to reveal the true us. So I experience this in many different ways. The mikveh, the part of the relationship process where we're washed, cleansed, and transformed. And that sort of equates, remember the story of Esther, where Esther undergone a whole purification process with oils and cleansing to go before the king. Now, God wants us to be able to enter into his presence without any guilt, shame, condemnation, or anything negative in our lives. So he wants any wrong thinking which will hinder and stop us having that relationship, so we can go through a process that will eventually bring us into transformation. And the ketubah, the marriage covenant, and then there was the huppah or chuppah. It's the marriage altar. It was the covering of God's presence. And these things relate to different perspectives. Now, in the Hebrew marriage thing, and this is very interesting, what they would say, having undergone the ketubah, having gone through this process, the groom-to-be would say, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. Now, do you recognize that statement? John 14. The sort of bride-to-be would say back to him, when will you return to receive me unto yourself? He would say, I do not know the day or the hour, but when my father approves the wedding chamber, he will send me back. And I think, again, this is everything that it states in John 14, which most people, if they don't understand the process of relationship, will miss completely the significance of that. Now, of course, Jesus did go to the cross, and he did prepare us to be a place of dwelling, and he did come back in resurrection to receive us into that place and come to dwell in us. And he basically said, on that day, you will know. And then we're invited into this relationship, which is a joyous event. So the marriage language is what Jesus was describing. The Hebrew marriage was an invitation that can be seen in the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments, which is not a set of laws, but a ketubah marriage agreement. And if you want to go into that in great detail by someone who's probably more attuned to it than I am, then there's a guy called Shane Willard, and you can Google him and find out. He says, no, I'm not saying I endorse everything that Shane Willard teaches about this. And I'm not saying we need to embrace Judaism or Hebrewism in any shape or form. What I'm saying is God used this and an illustration because he invited Israel when they came out of Egypt, which is figuratively us coming out of the world into a relationship of intimacy, but they turned it down and set up a whole system, which was a system of mediation, which was not intimacy, because it was someone who mediated on behalf of you. And there was no real marriage. Even though God desired it, they made a golden calf. And you know the big story. And ultimately, we then have taken the Ten Commandments as a series of things which we should do or else, because they're laws. But actually, they were not laws. They were an invitation into a relationship. And I may go into that in a little bit more detail when we look at that whole perspective. So this process deepens our relationship and our union. The romance of becoming one is where God pursues and woos us back to himself. So the garden of your heart equates to lakah. And I remember engaging God in the garden of my heart and looking into his eyes, into the Father's eyes, and just being overwhelmed by his desire for me. And it was where my real pursuit of intimacy really began. And I had experiences within the garden in my own heart. I had experiences within the Garden of Eden in heaven, within the Father's garden in heaven. There were many encounters which unveiled and revealed more and more of God's desire for intimacy. Then there's the dance floor where we entwine and we become one, and there's a revelation of heart to heart cardiogenosis of our who we are and all that God has prepared for us, the wonder of this relationship that we have. And that equates to the Segula, where he begins to make it clear that we are his treasured possession. We always have been, and we have a destiny, and all of that gets revealed in an entwinement as we dance together. There is another key component, obviously, the Ketubah covenant, that requires preparation for us to make a correct covenant. Now, when I made my Ketubah, I was completely unprepared and completely made it in a wrong perspective. And I look back and think, how can I get it so wrong? But I followed other people's teaching and other things, and I went through the process. And then when I went through my dark cloud experience, I had to burn it because it was so one-sided that I realized my whole perspective towards God was completely the wrong way around. And for that ketubah to be made, the soaking room equates to the mikveh, which was the washing thing. And that's where they would be baptized, if you like. Now, we may need in this soaking room experience, a dark cloud experience to help us come to that point of trust and surrender in God. I needed one. I didn't understand why I needed one. That was the point. If I understood why I needed one, then I probably wouldn't have needed one. But I didn't understand, and I was resistant in my soul to the process that was going on. My spirit fully wanted to lead me into that experience, but my soul was resistant. Now, the act of surrendering, being single, and being independent to embrace union equates to the huppah, or the covering, or the overshadowing, which is the dark cloud. The dark cloud has God in the very midst of it. And my encounter with God at that moment was so intense that it totally overwhelmed me, and I could not even be in that presence of the person of God. This is engaging God's person, not just a presence. But that experience was so overwhelming that I couldn't even stay there for even a fraction of a second. It was too intense. Now I dwell there. Now I live in his presence. I abide in his presence. I abide in the light of his presence. It is no longer overwhelming, but it's equally awesome. And my experiences there are life-changing. And ultimately, when we go through this presence, we get to come into a relationship with God, which is so deep, it is beyond everything I could have imagined or thought before. The bridal chamber equates to the consummation to become united, face to face, heart to heart, mind to mind, with God himself. And of course, there are many encounters on the journey that facilitated this union. It didn't just happen in one experience. There was a long lead into these experiences, and God had been preparing me my whole life to enter into this. If I didn't know it, but I look back and I can see the many signposts on my journey that pointed the direction that God was doing. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. And often when we're going through something, we can't really see what's going on, why it's happening, and we may emotionally be so involved that it's difficult to come to a place where we surrender. But actually, when I look back and I see so many encounters that now I realize was part of the process. At the time, they were just wonderful experiences, but they weren't random experiences. God had me on a journey that facilitated this wonderful union. So there are questions that you may have, and they're worth asking. Where is my first love gate? Where is the garden of our heart? Where is the dance floor? Where is the soaking room? Where are they literal places? Well, they're experiences that you can have. And, the garden of our heart, and I will go into this more when we really talk about it, is something that describes our soul and the way God wants to engage us there. So I think they're figurative in one sense, but they're also places of engagement in a dimensional way within me and within each of us that relates to spirit and soul body in overlap. So how does engaging them relate to this process of union? You know, what happens? What does God do? And what does that do to us? Now, my experiences in Revelation were progressive. They didn't jump in at the level I know it now. I would not have been able to cope with that. So the relationship deepened. And as I progressed in the relationship, I understood more and more of who God was and more of who I am. Now, Revelation 3:20, I've heard, I think this was the first verse I ever spoke about publicly in a youth group that was doing the Sunday service in a Methodist church. And I was given this verse and asked to speak about it. Now, of course, in those days, I thought this verse, and I'll read it. Now, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him and he with me. Now, of course, I interpreted that as a salvation experience. God is outside of everyone and he's knocking and asking each of us to open the door for us to come in, him to come into our lives. And he's speaking to everyone. And if they can hear his voice, maybe they'll open the door. But I realized that this isn't, because it was talking to a church in Revelation. It was talking to a church, or the 7 churches. So it's not talking to people who don't know God, it's talking to people who do. Now, ultimately, you could say that it's talking to people who don't know, but not from the outside. This is not an outside in salvation experience, but an inside out being filled and flowing with life. So if God is in everyone and he wants everyone to experience him, then he is knocking. And really, rather than saying, open the door and let me out, or let me in that way, he's basically saying, I'm within your spirit. Let me into your soul and body. Let me fill you. Let me share life with you, which is what dining was all about. It was a very intimate thing to dine with somebody so that we can dine with him and he with us. There's this sharing of life together, but it isn't per se him on the outside of us. It's him working on the inside of us. So when Paul experienced a light around him, his revelation was God was pleased to reveal his son in me, already in him. And that revelation came. That was when Paul effectively opened the door to welcome God, who was already in him, to fill him and engage his soul. Because God had been working in his spirit, and Paul had been resisting it because of his insistence to follow his own religious path of Judaism. Now, then he surrendered that path and entered into a relationship which opened up a whole different realm of knowledge, experience, understanding of who God was. And then Paul preaches this amazing message of God in the Gentiles, this message of inclusion and mystic union. When I first heard the term mystic union, I was totally against it. Just was so programmed to have the traditional view of salvation. When a friend of mine encouraged me to read a book on mystic union by John Crowder, I think it was, I was horrified, and I never read it, but over a number of years, God began to show me what mystic union was all about and the fact of what he has done in the finished work of Christ and the grace message, to which now I fully embrace. And, and I had the privilege actually a couple of years ago of meeting up with my friend again, who I hadn't seen for a few years, and sharing with him how sorry I was that I'd rejected his message. And although we stayed in relationship and we worked it through, so it wasn't an issue to us relationally, I didn't receive the truth that could have helped me several years before it did. And I shared with him how he had been part of my journey. Even though at the time he may have thought I was rejecting him, actually that seed was there at work in me, just like it was in Paul, that God was pleased to reveal his son in me. And I discovered that reality as well. So this is not an outside in salvation experience, but an inside out being filled and flowing with life. So to begin with, I believe it's good to open that gate regularly, daily, by choice. It's a choice to say, I welcome you into me, and I engage you in this amazing romance of first love. And that's what my experience was. It was a romance. It was me entering into a first love experience that I never really had in the physical realm. So I didn't really understand what first love was all about. And of course, I didn't know even then what was going on, but this is where I know God has brought me. So to experience God's first love, for all of us, we need to choose to open and accept the invitation. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens, there's an invitation there that God has given us, that Jesus has given us, that if we open the door, he's going to come in and we're going to feast together and we're going to celebrate and we're going to enjoy life. It's also an opportunity to express our first love for God. As much as he wants to express his love for us, he wants us to be able to express our love for him, because this is something which is mutual. It's not a one-sided relationship. This is a relationship which is a real full-on relationship. So what is our daily experience of first love? Do we have one? Have we ever encountered that? And people say, well, how can I do it? Well, by choice. Even if you can't see it, it's true that it's there within you. Make the choice. Let God know, I'm going to open that gate today. You can close your eyes. You can start to meditate on the gate. You can choose to see the picture of you opening the door, letting God's presence come and engage you. For me, it was always a hug. It was always an embrace. That was what I experienced whenever I opened that door. Now I realize that within that place, there is a fountain. It's the source of life. I can drink from that fountain, as Jesus said we could do. Rivers of living water begin to flow into me, into the core of my being. All of that began to take place, but it was the embrace which was the key for me. So how does God express his love for us and to us? And I guess everyone may experience that slightly differently. But I believe it's through what he's done and continues to do, through the finished work of cross Jesus, what God did before the foundation of the world, through the relationship he's continually pursuing, through what he says and continues to say. Because I want to hear what he says about me and what he ongoingly says about me, so I can embrace that as the vast sum of his thoughts towards me, through what he desires and intends for us. And I do believe he has desires and intention for us to fully know the depths of that union and relationship and fully embrace who we really are, because the world needs us. Through always being available to us, he never leaves or forsakes us. It may feel like he is, but most of that is our perception. It's not the truth. He's never, ever left us. Through always wanting the best for us, being generous and lavish in grace, through bringing good out of all the situations in our lives, which we may make terrible mistakes and do things which are beyond, but nothing is beyond his ability to bring good out of it and to redeem it in our lives. And he will always do it because he's merciful. And I believe it's through being unconditional in love, limitless in grace, and triumphant in mercy. So how do we receive and experience his love? So choose to open the gate for the intimacy of a personal interactive love relationship to begin. Don't live on the trickle which is flowing under the threshold of the gate. Open it so you can go knee deep, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, until it floods and fills us like abundant life in us. How do we express our love for God and to him? And it isn't just through praise and worship, which would have been the primary thing that we thought, well, I'm expressing my worship to God and my love for him in songs of adoration, in songs of praise, which is great, but it's not limited to that. That's just one small aspect of it. Now, showing our love to God, I believe, should be a priority. It needs to be a priority in our lives. If we're going to embrace God's love for us, it needs to be a priority that we engage the opportunity to do that, both to receive and to give. God is always available to us and promises never to leave or forsake us. Therefore, if we ever choose to open that first love gate, he is going to come in. He is speaking. Are we listening? Are we listening to the invitation he's given us to open the gate? Now, quality time is one of the love languages that demonstrates the value and importance of our relationship. Relationships are very little importance if you do not want to give the time for those relationships. You know, people talk about long distance relationships and all of that stuff, but true intimacy requires time, and it requires availability, and it requires desire to prioritize that above other things. Now, the Father once asked me, how do you feel my love? Now, immediately I thought, well, intimacy. But I also thought, well, what is that? Because a lot of people, when you talk about intimacy, they talk about, oh, the warm, fuzzy feelings, or feeling, oh, this intense, amazing love. And, you know, those emotional experiences, which, you know, I've had without a doubt. But that wasn't primarily what I felt every day. So I realized that what I was looking at when I thought of intimacy was what other people were describing their intimacy was. So what does intimacy mean to each of us? Now, there are 5 human love languages. Most people have at least one that is dominant. Do we know our love language? It really does help if we're in relationship with other people, and particularly in a marriage relationship. Our personal love language may be different from our love language with God. Initially, I thought my personal love language was physical touch. Now, I thought that because I lacked physical touch in my upbringing. I lacked the touch and the hugs and the emotional connection that came with physical touch. So I lacked it. Therefore, I craved it, and I looked for it in other people, in other relationships, because I was felt deprived of it. Now, this is not something that's conscious. It's something that happens on the inside of you. And I was drawn to physical touch. But as I've become more whole and I know myself better, I realize that actually quality time, and in my relationship now, quality time is what I value the most. And quality time is not just time where we do quality things, if you like. It's any time that we spend together. That might be time we spend together in the garden. That might be time we spend together watching TV. It's just that we are giving that time to be with each other. Now, great, it's when we chat and we talk and we have intimate times. But I thought I needed physical touch. Now, I'm not saying physical touch isn't great. It is. But I was drawn to it because of a lack. Be careful that your actual language of love is not determined by what you've missed in your life, but actually how you really relate in love. And a lot of people, they like words of affirmation, but maybe they weren't given any words of affirmation when they were younger and being brought up, and therefore they're missing it, and that sort of draws them to want it in a way because it fulfills something they're missing in their life. Now, if you're looking for a partner to give you what you are missing in your life, you are going to drain them dry, and they'll never, ever be able to meet the need that you have. Only God can meet that need. Let's make sure it's about what we can give in love rather than just what I need to receive. So my God love language is also quality time, I'm aware. And when I sort of discovered that, I told God what the answer was to his question. How do I feel your love? Well, when we hang out together, where we're just together, where we're heart to heart, where you're in conversation, where we're talking together, where you show me things, where we're having a good time, just that relationship. So when I just was in intimacy with the Father, that was enough. I knew I was loved because the Father gave me that quality time. It made me feel special. It made me feel the most important person in the world. There may have been experiences that went with it that could have been emotional, but just the fact that God was there and available for me was what actually was why I felt God love. Now, the love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, receiving gifts. There are also some other updated names and concept for this. That 5 love languages, I think, was originally put together in a book by Gary Chapman, I think he's called. And I read the book, and it was actually quite helpful for me to understand that we have different ways of both giving and experiencing love. Now, the others that I've seen, and I just did a Google search of some of these: activity, appreciation, emotional, financial, intellectual, physical, practical. And those are sort of different ways of expressing the other things. The question is, do you know that God always has a love language, and he also has a language that we can engage with? So God also has a love language. Jesus said there is a way that he receives love from us. And that is part of probably one of many ways that we touch his life and touch his heart. But there is one that Jesus spoke about. And there's one way that he said that we can express our love to him. This is what he said, John 14. Again, probably my favorite chapter in the Bible. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Verse 15, verse 21, whoever has my commandments and keeps them is who loves me. Verse 23, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. Now, this can create a big problem if we don't really understand what this is talking about, because this can get us into striving, into works, into fear. Because, well, if I love God, if I want to show him, I got to keep his commandments. What are his commandments? I got to keep the law. Nothing to do with that whatsoever. 3 times Jesus said, if you love me, you will effectively do what I'm commanding you to do. Notice he didn't say, if you love me, you'll worship me. He didn't say, if you love me, you'll serve me. He didn't say, if you love me, you'll read the Bible and know the Bible. He didn't say, if you love me, you'll give financially. He didn't say, if you love me, you'll obey me. But isn't keeping his commandments a form of obedience? Well, not really, in the way that it's obeying a law. Jesus used the word translated commandment, and the way he used it is not about keeping the law or keeping the 10 commandments or any of that. The word commandment is not a law, but a direction that results in something. So if you're looking Strong's Concordance, entoli, which is a feminine noun, derived from 2 words, in, and telos, which means, and this is how these words are. So in intensifies the meaning of what follows. Telos, reach the end, consummation. Now, whenever it says properly, this is what it actually literally means. It means in the end. So this is not a commandment with a punishment or consequence if we don't do it. This is a direction that has a end that we can experience and receive in the end as the result, if you like. So the result of this. So we're conditioned often to associate the word commandment with the law and therefore an old covenant way of thinking, but the word has an embedded goal in its meaning. So what is the commandment? Jesus said, there is a new commandment. Jesus gave that new commandment to his disciples, and that new commandment redefines everything because it actually completely sums up everything that they couldn't do in the Old Testament, and now they were empowered to do in the New. Jesus only really commands one thing. John 13:34, I'm giving you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. He stresses it and stresses it and stresses it. And the goal of that commandment really is very simple. Let me love you so you can love others. So there's something within this that is empowering. It isn't something to be striving to do or try and fulfill. And we can only do it because he has first loved us. Now, in the Mirror Bible, it says this, John 13:34, I give you a new commandment, keep on loving one another just as I've loved you. My love for you is the source of your love for one another. The word entole, which is often translated commandment or precept, has two components, in, and telos from telo, to set out for a definite point or goal, properly the point aimed at as a limit, that is by implication the conclusion of an act or state, the result, the ultimate or prophetic purpose. So the prophetic purpose inbuilt into this word, into what Jesus said, and it wasn't the word commandment as we in English may understand the word, it was the goal. The prophetic purpose was that we would be able to receive his love and therefore able to love, because the empowerment was built within the injunction there. So John 1:5 says, now I ask you, lady, not as though I am writing to you a new commandment, but the one which we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. So the beginning of the new covenant was love one another and be loved. Simple. It's not complicated. It's not difficult even, unless we have a problem receiving love and therefore being able to give love, or that we think this is a law that we have to obey or else. So the end result or goal is actually fulfilling our identity made in the image of God, so that we can love one another as we're loved by Jesus. That's the end result. He's basically just saying who you are, the prophetic fulfillment of who I called you to be, will enable you to love one another. If you just receive me and receive your identity in the love that I give you, you will be able to love everyone else. In other words, receive my love so you can love one another. It's not a law to obey, but someone to be and a relationship to share with others. God is wanting you to know who you are. God is not looking for our obedience to try and please him or impress him. God is not looking for us to obey him because we fear him. The command is not a law to keep, but an identity to experience and share with others. Now, hopefully, you can see that that is God's language of love, that we're just us, who he made us to be. And that pleases him and blesses him no end, because that is what he's always looking for, a union of love in relationship. So we can only love because we've first been loved by God. So God's love language is not obedience, as many would say, reading those verses, but it is being our true selves in intimate relationship. That is really all that everything is summed up in, and the whole of the old covenant fulfilled in Jesus in the new covenant is expressed in that one statement. Love one another as I've loved you. So we receive love so we can give love to God, ourselves, and others. Now, I got the question is, do we value love and love ourselves the way God does? Do we value and love ourselves the way God does? Or do we see ourselves through the lens of our lost identity and past behavior? Do we struggle to receive love because we do not feel worthy? How can we love ourselves? These are questions which I think are all legitimate. Now, I also found a self-love language. And this was inspired by the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And I got to say, they're somewhat female orientated, but that's okay, because I don't concern myself with that. So I'm going to share them with you, and they're a little bit amusing. So physical touch. Now think of you receiving something in loving yourself. So how do you love yourself? And it's not wrong to love yourself, because if you don't love yourself, how are you going to love others? Physical touch, things that make your body feel good and focus on your physical well-being. Massages, spa days, soft blankets, sort of moving your body, skincare, and all that stuff. Now, I'm sure men, you can find some stuff in there that actually you like doing. Acts of service, doing things for yourself that make life easier and more structured. Serving yourself, helping yourself have a better life. And they put down here therapy, organizing, cleaning, Mind you, I do the cleaning. Scheduling, delegating, planners, all that stuff. Receiving gifts, buying gifts for yourself and spending money on things that bring you joy. Now, I can definitely find quite a few of these. So they've got going out, buying makeup, clothes, vacations. Yeah, love those. Craft supplies. Not really, but well, yeah, I do. Woodworking stuff. So for me, it's like buying tools. That would definitely be receiving a gift to myself. Would be buying a new tool, investing in ourselves. Words of affirmation, giving yourself pep talks, encouraging words, being your own biggest cheerleader. Positive self-talk, daily affirmation, journaling, self-improvement. Now, all these things are demonstrations that we care about ourselves, that we're looking to take care of ourselves. Quality time, spending time alone, time with your hobbies. I do. I love doing the garden, woodworking. I love making things. I love doing those things. And I feel God's love in doing them, and I feel God's pleasure while I do them. Meditation, reading, hobbies are taking yourself on dates. Well, I can't say I've ever done that, but I do have a date with a workshop, quite a few times a week. So these are sort of, in some way, a little bit humorous, but in reality, it does pose the question, do you love yourself? And how do you express that love to yourself? Because God loves you and he wants to bless you. So how can you be a blessing to yourselves? And if you struggle with it, or if you struggle with any of that even concept, ask God to show you why you may have a blockage to loving yourself in that way. So going back to Revelation 3:20, we can give God this invitation to fill us, flow through us every day by choosing to open the door of first love and engage. It's a choice. Every one of us can make that choice. First love, true first love, is the primary and most important relational encounter and experience we can ever have. It is initially available to us daily through accepting an invitation and then opening the door and welcoming in God's presence and embracing his presence as he embraces you. We can continue to do that until it becomes our state of being. I don't open the first love gate every day anymore. I'm living in the state that God is within the core of my being because I have done all that is needed for that to be my state of being. But I learned that. I opened my first love gate for years, every day, embracing the Father. And sometimes, I got it wrong, because I would embrace the Father and then I would say, what are we going to do today? And I became orientated around what we were going to do rather than just being. So God had to deal with my sort of needing to do, because doing gave me identity, to being, and that took me through becoming in a state of being so that I can know the reality of who I am. And that isn't about doing anything. It's because I know who he says I am and I believe him and I embrace that state of being in relationship. So I don't need to ask, what are we going to do? All I need to do is engage his heart. Because if there's anything that he wants to express that I can cooperate with him in, just like Jesus, only doing what he saw the Father doing, then I'm able to receive that in the hug. I'm able to receive that cardiogenosis, knowledge of the heart, in the hug, in the intimacy, in that wonderful bliss of relationship. And I want to encourage each of us to open that door by choice, making it a priority, see the benefit. You will benefit from embracing God. And if you struggle, you'll benefit from identifying and understand why you struggle so that those struggles can be removed. Because it starts where you are. God doesn't expect you to do anything beyond where you are, but he doesn't also want you to stay where you are. He wants you to make progress and journey into a deeper relationship, go beyond ankle deep of experience in the spirit and the life of God, go beyond knee deep, go beyond waist deep, be taken by the flow. Because when you're out of your depths, and you're not got your feet on the ground anymore, and you're not struggling and fighting for it, then you go with the flow where the river of life is going. You know, I've had so many experiences with the river of life, both within my being and within heaven. And one day I just lay in the river of life and I just let it take me and wind down to a place I'd never been to before. And I understood something of how the river of life flows into us and why sometimes people don't understand it's flowing into us because of that experience. You know, I love flowing with the river of life. The river of life will flow from your spirit into your soul, into the garden of your heart. It can water your garden. It can water your soul. It can water your life with abundance, blessing. You know, so I'm going to leave it there. I mean, I've got lots more to share even in this session, but we're going to go into an activation. And in that activation, again, I want you to come to a place of rest. I want you to be open just to experience where you really are in that relational place. It's like there are a lot of experiences that we can have that can be confusing. There are a lot of experiences that we can have that we might be striving for. What God wants is us to experience rest, to come to that place where we abandon our soul into the trust of God who loves us unconditionally, where we can get out of that boat of survival and sink in the vast ocean of unconditional love. So I encourage us to close your eyes, begin to think about living loved, that right now God loves you. Right now, his love is surrounding you. Just begin to come to that place of meditation, to that place of rest. Begin to start breathing slowly, more deeply, more focused, so you can breathe in and breathe out the unconditional love of the Father. You're breathing it in. You're taking it internally. It's flowing in you. Can feel that unconditional love. Can flow through your being. So just become still. And I would encourage you, whether you've done this 1,000 times, whether you've never done it before, picture a door. Picture the door of first love within your spirit. That door has a handle on it. You can picture a door. If you struggle to picture or think of a door, think of one which you know really well, your front door, a door you're familiar with. Just begin to imagine that door. Picture it. You may feel it, you may sense it, you may just have that sense of knowing, or you might be able to see the door in your mind's eye, in the eyes of your heart, your imagination. So picture that door. And by your choice, you can open the door. Jesus is knocking. Jesus is speaking to you, asking you to open that door. He's given you the invitation. If you open that door, he is going to come and you're going to experience his presence. So I encourage you, just reach out in your imagination by choice and open the door. Just make that choice to open the door, open it wide, and just welcome the presence of Father, Son, and Spirit. Welcome the family of God, that they might surround you, that you might be in their very midst as they embrace you, hug you, entwine with you, come into a union, a deeper relationship. Just stay in that embrace. Stay in that place of intimacy. The Father, Jesus, they may speak to you, they may whisper into your ear, they may woo you, they may begin to say, Lakar, I want you to be my very own. Just stay in that place of rest, that place of intimacy. in the embrace of love, I believe that God would want to speak to you, call you deeper. Just open your heart, open your spiritual ears to listen. Let your spirit and soul engage with these words from the Father. Son, I call your spirit to attention. Son, listen. Listen to the words of my heart. I call you to step out of independence and sink into the ocean of love and joy and peace. I call forth your true identity as a son, as a co-heir. I call you to return to your true origin within my heart. I call you to enter into my rest. I call you to come deeper into intimacy. I call you to lie down in an oasis of peace by the quiet brook of bliss. I call forth your sonship identity, position and authority. I call forth your destiny to manifest God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. I call forth your destiny to fill the earth with my glory. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you unconditionally. Rest in my love. Rest in my joy. Rest in my peace. I love you. I love you. I love you. You can stay in that place of rest as long as you want. Let it be your abiding dwelling place. Let it be a constant in your life. So don't rush. Don't feel you have to come out of that place. Stay there if you'd like. You know, you can turn your speakers off. Just stay there. If anyone does want to ask any questions, we've got some time to do a Q&A session. You can just put your hand up using the reactions and hand raise there. and then we can do some Q&A. But that's not the most important thing right now. You can experience more and go deeper if you really stay in that place. Okay. Okay, Norma, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, you had promised that we could, that you had some information, further information in your notes. How do we see those notes? I think it was about the different chambers of the heart and the marriage
Yeah, basically the
levels.
notes PDF should be made available as part of the download.
Oh,
So within the Patreon teaching, the notes are available there. So you'll
okay.
see all of the PDF slides that I use, and you can go from there. If you have a problem, just email into admin and they'll help you with how to see them.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
basically
Thank
the notes of everything are always made available as PDF slides of the PowerPoints that I do.
you. This was such a beautiful, um, I don't know, just so yummy how you explained our, you know, the marriage intimacy and bliss and covenant. And, it's just, I don't know, I feel like this can just be sort of applied to our own relationships and marriage in such a profound way, just with the depth of the Holy Three love for us that is just beyond, well, to quote you, beyond, beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think I ever really understood first love in a human sense because I had so many needs that I was looking for fulfillment in that I was more, I think, needing to be loved than I knew how to love. And therefore, when I began to engage God and he began to show me what unconditional love is and the experience of it, then I was able then to have the privilege really of entering into a relationship which was first love. And I experienced all the things in as, relationships are. Yeah, if you've ever experienced them like that, it was just overwhelmingly amazing to me. And God restored that. And I think that was just his grace and mercy, in such a way that I began to realize in a human relationship that what I had experienced with God and literally going through this process, literally, I could go through that process with somebody else. I could look into someone's eyes, and say, Lakar, not that I would use Hebrew language, but I would make known my desire. And actually, I did, on our second date, when we were by a lake, in a gardens, I spent about 2 hours looking into her eyes, lost track of time completely, and actually looked into her soul and looked into the needs of her soul, and right there and then made a commitment to love her unconditionally. And I know people say, how can you do that, after a week? Because I was ready to. My heart was open in such a way that I was able to communicate heart to heart, and I was able to engage her spirit. I'd never done that before in that way. And her response was, you're doing something to me. What are you doing? You're getting under my skin, in a good way, because I was engaging her spirit. I was in surrounding her with my spirit. So I learned to put into practice that which I had with God in a relationship. And, to be honest, it was, it just showed me how merciful and how wondrous God is in restoring things. So restoring first love, obviously the primary thing is with God, but actually there's no reason why he can't restore marriages or bring us into true marriage. Because I realized I had no idea what marriage was, and I had no real idea about how you could enter into a union of spirit, soul, body. Obviously, we get entwined in our soul and emotions, with somebody. We can get physically engaged with somebody, but how do you engage your spirit with somebody in such a way that actually you become one spirit, soul, and body? And I had never been able to do that because I didn't know how. No one had ever taught that or taught me that, you know. So in this relationship, God taught me instinctively, you know, and it was such an overwhelming experience. So to be honest, it's like it is possible, you know. And there may be those that are divorced or have lost a loved one, and they're feeling, oh well, my life is going to be alone forever or whatever, you know. Actually, it isn't. You know, God can give you a restored love relationship. You know, I'm sure for most people there's someone out there if they want to, you know, if you're happy and content. And I was happy and content really with on my own, but now I realize what a limitation that would have been. And I'm so grateful that God opened up the opportunity for me to enter into another relationship by challenging me to do so. Really, I wouldn't have done it without him really directing that. But I realized that that's possible for all of us. You know, we can enter into a union with each other that mirrors our union with God.
Yes. Yes. You're looking younger, happier, healthier, more handsome, incredible than ever. No, it's made a real difference in the way you communicate, Mike, the way you look. I mean, thank the Lord for her, the divine, you know, union, really.
Yeah, no, it
So
is a joy,
good.
and so beyond my expectation. And God is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond what we can ask or think. And that's just, he's just so merciful and gracious, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing your
Okay.
unbelievably deep heart about that. Was so transparent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Laura, you've got your hand up there. There we go. Let me add you. There you go.
Hi, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to say thank you, like Norma. I find that when you share very intimate things, private things, it opens doors. It's like some lies about us. Personally, I find when you share like that, some lies which seems to have taken ground in my mind are moving away, thinking, oh, yeah, I knew that. I don't know how. I knew it. So thank you for that, because it's not everybody who makes themselves so vulnerable in sharing such intimate details, I would say, but they are so helpful. I don't know if you realize how helpful they can be. And they open different doors to different people. When I share with some friends, the same witnessing you have offered has a different effect on them than on me than the other one. And it's fascinating. So just wanted to share that first of all. So thank you.
You're welcome.
The thing I really enjoy is what you were saying about how God has been preparing you to have a love in your life. And as you know, and I've been alone for 18 years now, but I was not interested at all in a relationship. And then in the last years, I became far more open once God did some work in me, like relearning to trust men, which is major. And a lot of women are sharing that. But what I have discovered is that, in fact, I was not really ready for a relationship, as you know, with my personality, as we are all unique, and that God needed to do more into the healing. Otherwise, I would not be able to have the relationship He wants me to have with a man. And what I would like to share also is that so many women have been raised to answer men's needs that we forgot ourselves. So we put ourselves on the back seat and we serve these men.
Mm.
And especially my generation, our generation, and it's still happening in the new generation, but it's disappearing, I would say. It's not as common as it was in my generation. So I realized that all my life I've been raised to fulfill the needs of men because they were more important than me. Yes, being raised a Catholic also.
Mm. Yeah.
So when you are alone, and it's not always your own fault, you know, and I'm very happy on by myself, and I have lots of friends. I have a very lovely social life, but intimacy with somebody else is something so deep and can be so hurtful. Then God doesn't want us to be hurt again. And I can see, and I want to share it with women who can hear that sometimes we need to go through far more healing and changing and transformation before we can really have a good relationship with a man.
No, and it's the other way around as well. It's also men also have unfulfilled needs and expectations that they may look to draw from a woman when actually our responsibility is to give primarily, not to receive. Now, you do receive, but that's not the goal. The goal is how can I love somebody? My answer to that is, well, how can I bless somebody? You know, it's like God so loved the world he gave. He didn't say, well, God so loved the world that he waited for the world to give to him. It's like, no, he took the sort of proactive stance of giving. And in any relationship, our question should be, how can I give love? How can I love that person? You know, and ultimately, you know, understanding someone's love language helps us to be able to meet that in someone, to love them. You know, if I'm, let's say I needed words of affirmation and I was giving words of affirmation thinking that was sharing love with somebody, and their love language was gifts or something, they're just not receiving my love because all they're receiving is words, blah 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 blah. I mean, that's how they might feel, you know, because it's words to them. It doesn't do anything for them. For someone else whose love language is words of affirmation, they would feel so blessed by being told how beautiful they are or how wonderful they are, and you know, all that stuff, you know. But for me, it just goes over the top of my head because it's like, yeah, you know. So actually, we need to sort of be able to express love to each other in a way that is communicable and able to be received. Therefore, knowing one another is key. And I mean knowing one another at a level that only God can know. Therefore, God can communicate to us how to love somebody else. You know, and that for me is what I was able to experience this time around in a relationship, was I was able to look into someone's soul, see their areas of woundedness and brokenness, and to say, I am going to love this person back into wholeness, you know, unconditionally, whether they love me or not. You know, and I made that choice to say, even if this doesn't go anywhere, I'm going to be a blessing to this person, and I'm going to choose to love them in an unconditional way, and I'm not expecting anything back. Now, when it was reciprocated, it's wonderful, but I'd never sort of felt that way before. But that's really how God is with us all the time. You know, he's not there saying, oh, love me, love me, love me, love me. He is love. How can you add to love? You can't add to it or increase it. It is love. But having a relationship and spending the time is what pleases God. And therefore, for me, quality time is what is so important, you know. But the healing and the wholeness that we need to come into, even to be able to receive, is something which I think God wants to do with all of us, you know, to make us whole, to meet the unmet needs in our life so that we're not demanding those needs are met. You know, it's like, if
Yes.
God meets my needs, anything else is a huge bonus. That's only the cream on top of the cake. I still got the cake. The cream's great, but the cake is wonderful. And I feel God wants us to know fully what his unconditional love is, so that then we enter into a relationship not being needy. If I'm
Yeah.
needy and I'm going to need somebody to meet those needs, and actually if I'm not needy and God has met those needs, then I'm going to be in a different way. My whole demeanor is, because I've been loved, I can love. You know, it's going back to that, you know, John 13:34, you know, love one another as I have loved you.
Yeah.
And we can't do that in the way God desires us to do it unless we've been loved. So when I look back and see my journey into this experience of God's love and the intimacy and the union of it, that was the preparation that enabled me then to enter into that in a way which I never really dreamed possible. Now, you still have to navigate the emotions and all of the things around it, and you have to sort of come to how this works out in practice and how you can live that sort of love relationship. You know, and sometimes, you know, for me, it was so overwhelming. You know, I struggled even with the sense of, you know, I don't want to be away from this person for a minute. You know, unless I just don't want this person. I want to be with them all the time. But I know that was just me coming to a place of balance where it was healthy, because that's how I felt. But I know that's not possible in life, is it? You can't be with someone joined at the hip every second. But with God, you are. He's in us and we're in him. So we can have that constant, continual state of being loved, you know, which then enables us to then outwork everything else from that perspective, which is joyous. You know, it is a joy
Yeah.
that is, you know, beyond what I would have thought possible. So, you know, I'm very happy, really.
Yeah. And very important too, what you said, to love ourselves and to treat ourselves.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much, when I ask God, what would you like me to do? And he says, enjoy yourself.
Yep, absolutely.
It's
Yeah, and I
in the
never
last
went through
few
that.
years. Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I look back in my past, and I would never ever buy anything for myself or treat myself ever. I just never really considered doing that, because I think it was a lack of love, lack of being loved, and a lack of actually loving myself in the right way. And I'm not saying be over the top and be narcissistic and all that stuff, but just to actually treat yourself with honor and respect and love, you know. And therefore, if a language of love is gifts, why shouldn't I gift myself something? Because it shows that I value myself, you know. And I think it'd be an interesting thing for people to ask themselves the question, you know,
Yeah.
where are they on that scale of loving one another and loving themselves? You know, where are they? How do they love themselves? You know, do they feel guilty if they treat themselves to something nice? Now, I'm not saying be materialistic, because, you know, materialism can be trying to meet a spiritual need with a physical thing. I'm saying express the spiritual dynamic in a physical way, you know, without feeling guilt. You know, I always had to try and justify why I would buy something to myself, you
I'm
know,
the same.
but now I don't, you know, and if I'm blessed, great. Well, I'm going to enjoy that blessing. Yeah, I can bless other people, but I can also enjoy the blessing myself, you know, and therefore, you know, I was blessed a while ago, and I thought, okay, what can I do? God, is there anything you want me to do with this blessing? That's why I asked first. And he said, no, bless yourself. So I thought, oh, what would I like? You know, so I thought, I couldn't think of anything. Then it was like, you know, what's the one tool that I would really like? Oh, a new table saw. I thought, you know, so I did the research, found the one I wanted, and then went and bought it, and I was blessed by it. You know, and it's enabled me to do all sorts of creative things, which I couldn't do before. You know, so in a sense, it's like I think we all need to consider, how do we love ourselves? What is the language that we primarily would feel loved by ourselves? You know, and for some people that is alone time, or time where they can just be quiet and get away from the things. And sometimes we can actually bless our partner by giving her that space, or giving them that space to enjoy sometimes being in a place where they can just focus on themselves, you know. But yeah, so it's good. And I'm sure for all of us, there's a lot that God can do in our lives to bring us into a place of real wholeness when it comes to relationships, you know. Yeah, looks like awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Who we got next? Jay. I think you just got a J on your screen. If you want to ask a question, if you want to turn your camera on, or you got your hand up, so you can unmute and just ask the question if you want. Nope. Okay. Anyone else got anything they want to talk about? Okay, hang on. There's someone who's put their hand up. I'll come back to you, Norma. Yeah.
Hello, Mike.
Yeah.
God bless all beautiful for you. I was out for a while. I don't know what happened with our connection. I think my system got tapped into. This is Serge Eugene. Remember, I was on watching all your unconditional love. So I received the email yesterday, and the other day I was excited to come back on. I miss it today, although happy Mother's Day to all the mother. But the topic you're talking about is something I have an idea, so I can't wait to go back from the beginning and watch. And I listened to your testimony before about your life, you know, your wife and your new relationship. Part of, I could say this, although I have to have an idea, I could say this, I think you know, helpful. When I think about restoration of all things, we see the Lord working with all aspects and every avenue of creation, Son of God, you know, Melchizedek, Christ, and the creation groaning with expectation and relationship. I know this is something also that has to be addressed, that has to be get right, correct. And it is something has to be done by God. This is not one man show or somebody gonna come up and with a great idea. It is something the Holy Spirit has to do. Restoration of all things, relationships, sex, marriage, and all of that. We have to get that back. God, there's no way restoration of all things gonna happen, and without that also being constructed a new approach. It needs the order, it needs the oneness, it needs the holiness, it needs the respect, it needs the sanctification. Again, part the restoration of all things. So I feel it begun. I really, since the beginning, I'm glad you tackled this topic, and some of us definitely are seeing it. It begun, and the Holy Spirit is definitely doing it. And I'm glad for that. I'm looking forward for the divine, for the revelation that's going to come through, that all of us can share and embrace and see the need for it. This is a part where part of restoration of all things that's happening. It's much needed in that area. So thank you again, you know, for bringing it up and sharing on that. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank
Awesome.
All right.
Okay. Corky, I think you've got your hand up there. If you want to unmute.
Yeah, I do. I do. I actually put it in the chat. But sometimes for those who have serious rejection issues, just being received and accepted for who you are, even if you're out there, can be a love language and enormously needed. Anyway, thanks, Mike. I can see I've made progress. I've been listening to this message for years now, and I'm like, yay, I made progress. Thanks. God bless.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is a long journey. Yeah, it takes time because we have experienced all sorts of things in our lives which have affected us in a negative way, which can affect how we do relate to other people and how we relate to each other and to God and everything else. So I know, ultimately, there's a sense of restoration that is taking place that brings us into a place of real wholeness and intimacy. And everyone's on a different place. We started in a different place. We had different experiences with it. So, absolutely. It's a process for all of us. And, when you look back and you can see progress, that's always a very positive thing that we can rejoice in and bless God in. Okay, I've got the question from Jay within the chat. It says, was Adam perfect in his emotional and soul state till his physical passing? Did he fall into anger, bitterness, then condemnation as he experienced the difference after the loss of his creative identity? After he followed Eve to save her, did Adam know, or was he able at any point in his life to reconnect with God? And how you're teaching us now. Did Adam fail, or why did he fail to do what you and other mystic teachers are teaching us to reconnect with God as we meant to? It's difficult to look in hindsight to what happened with somebody and what they experienced. And I have engaged with Adam, and I have talked with Adam and asked him about what it was like before the fall and what it was like afterwards. And I think the obvious answer to the question is, what was his response to what he did? Now, yeah, I believe that Adam was not deceived and he chose to follow Eve for Eve's redemption. And there is a redemptive aspect to that. But having done it, he lost the place that he was in, and he did lose his identity. And therefore, God had to engage him to encourage him back into that identity, which is why he was hiding through fear in the bushes, if you like. And God came and met him there, and God wanted to restore him back into relationship. But that relationship was not as it is through Jesus, because Jesus had not yet come. So it could only be restored to a degree. Now, after Adam died, he did go into the realm of God's presence. It wasn't that Adam didn't have relationship with God, but it was not the same as the relationship he had before in innocence, because he was no longer innocent and therefore was subject to feeling guilt and shame and condemnation and everything else. And as much as God wanted him to receive love, he didn't go back through the pathway of the fiery sword into partaking of the tree of life. He still followed the path of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If he had embraced the way back to intimacy, back to through the fire, because that fire would have purified him and refined him, he could have gone into that place. Enoch was able to go back through that fiery sword into the presence of God and had that refining. Elijah went up in a whirlwind and went up into fire and went through that way. So everyone who's engaged God ultimately has to do so through the fire. Jesus was our fire, if you like, our purification that we went through. So Adam essentially is part of the cloud of witnesses. He is restored in that sense, but on earth, he was still following that pathway. because he did not choose to follow the path where he would have gone through the fire in that way. But, you know, there's all sorts of different things. Well, why didn't he do this? Well, I don't know, because I'm not him, but I know what he did do and what he didn't do. And what he did is continuing following the path. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have a relationship with God, just not a relationship that was as it was before. He could have had a relationship as it was before if he'd chosen to go through the fire and engage that way. But the likelihood of going into there is that he probably wouldn't have been living on earth. You know,
So
because that relationship is going beyond how we can live on earth without Jesus at the time.
yes,
Yeah.
so like giving his state that did he
Okay.
then do that kind of anger into the nation?
I'm sorry, you're a bit sort of muffled there, but I can't really hear you. But
Did Adam also then feel the anger and desolation?
sorry, no, your microphone is muffled. I can't hear anything you're actually saying, so I can't really sort of answer the question any more than as I've done there. Okay, we'll move on to Rachel. You got your hand up there.
Hello. When you're separating your soul and your spirit, and so you're healing your soul so that they can be put back together again. Sorry if this sounds really silly,
Well,
but
let
how
me
do
stop you there. You don't do it. If you did it, you would be doing it in your own strength. What you do is you surrender so Jesus can separate soul and spirit and reintegrate you. It's that I had to get to the point where I trusted him to do that in my life, rather than me trying to do it in my own strength. Now I know there's teaching out there, whereas, well, you do this thing and you come against it. Or it's like you've got to treat your soul in the way God treats your soul, and that isn't to beat it up or to force it into submission or to, you know, separate it by force. It's got to be done by surrender. Therefore, when I surrendered, Jesus separated my soul and spirit and then reintegrated me. I just had to get to the point where I trusted him enough to surrender and let him do it. I couldn't do it myself. If I did it myself, I would be just reaffirming my own independence, and it would have not worked in that way. So Jesus, as the living word of God, who is sharper than a two-edged sword, divides to the separation of soul and spirit, not me or you.
I think I might be trying to help him out still.
Well, maybe, yeah. It's one of those, I know, I didn't know what he was doing, so I didn't really understand. So I didn't try it, although I'd heard the teaching about separating soul and spirit. I just didn't relate to it. I didn't resonate with it at all. It was just too violent and too harsh towards the soul. And I didn't feel comfortable, so I didn't do it. So I parked that, and then God took me through a process where then eventually he did it, but I had to go through the dark cloud experience to get to the point where I surrendered and let him do it, you know. And all of us will have a different experience of that. I will share that as part of the series, because it is part of the going through the preparation process to enter into relationship. But I'm glad that I didn't try and do it. And I'm glad that I really didn't know what God was doing until I got to the point of surrender. Then I realized what he'd done, you know, and I realized that I was made whole and integrated in a way that I wouldn't have known possible, but he did it. And that was what I needed him to do, rather than me sort of reinforcing my ability to sort of, you know, rule my soul, you know. Which a lot of people try and do, and it's encouraged in some Christian circles. You've got to rule in your life, and you've got to keep yourself in submission, and that's just treating yourself harshly, and that's not loving yourself, and it's not what Jesus does in loving us into wholeness, not beating us or you know, hammering us into submission. Even though I went through a dark cloud experience, he just allowed me to see what my soul was like, so that I was like, oh, I don't want to be like this. And I surrendered. You know, it was really difficult time, but it was a loving, I see it was his loving way of getting me to the point of surrender. He wasn't trying to punish me or make me feel bad. He just wanted me to see the state I was actually in, so then I would realize I don't want to be in that state, and then give him the opportunity of doing what he wanted to do all along. But I had to get to the point where to give him that permission, truly. And I remember on the journey, I once said, oh, I surrender, God, I really surrender. And what I meant was, please stop. I can't cope with this any longer. I didn't really want to surrender at that moment. But a few weeks later, I genuinely got to the end of my rope, and it was like, I truly surrender. I trust you. Do whatever you need to do. Rather than, well, I need to protect myself here. No, I trust that whatever you do is going to be for my good. And I allowed him to do it, and he did it. And I felt the immediate change in things in my life, and particularly in terms of being connected spirit to soul, because I was able to see things and perceive things and engage constantly in heaven, because I didn't have to come back out of it all the time. I could dwell in two places being totally connected, which I couldn't do before, you know. So I noticed immediate changes. You know,
Not quite there yet.
that's okay. It is a journey. You know, you can't rush it. You know, because if you don't go through the Lakar and Segula, you'll never get to the mikvah. You won't get to that place until the transformation takes place. So ultimately, I knew God loved me. I just had to get to the point where I totally trusted him in that love. And therefore, he kept giving me experiences that reaffirmed his love for me. And I encountered it, and I felt it at the ever deepening levels, which then prepared me when he knew I was ready to go into that dark cloud. You know, that's when all of what gone before unveiled. I could not shorten that. I think you can pursue it or desire it, and you can tell God it, but you know, it's your soul that has to get to that point, and none of us know when that point is truly until we get there. You know, but the key is stay in a place and following him on the journey, and don't try and rush ahead. Let him lead it. Because I realized looking back, the long journey I was on to get me to that point. You know, I didn't realize it until I looked back to see the steps that he took to get me there. You know, so just keep walking with him, and he'll take you to the place where you need to be. And he's not concerned about how long it takes in that sense. You know, don't resist, but you don't know what your soul is going to react to until you get there. You know, I was horrified the way my soul reacted when I got there, because it was and I was out of control, you know, because he wanted me to see what it was like for my soul to be independent and my spirit not to be ruling, because my spirit was ruling my soul most of the time, because my spirit was strong. But that's not what God wanted. He wanted my spirit and soul to be one, working together in cooperation, in union. And I wasn't. You know, most of the time, you know, my spirit was directing and everything was wonderful, but that wasn't how it was supposed to be. You know, you don't want your spiritual energy being worn out by trying to rule over your soul and keep your soul in line. You want your soul to be in union with your spirit and body. You know, and that took time for me to get to that place, which was okay. You know, and the journey is the journey, whether it's a 10-mile journey or 100-mile journey or 1,000-mile journey. It's still the journey that each of us will take to get us to the place where God knows that we're ready for that process, and we will come into a level of intimacy like never before. But it does take the separating of soul and spirit, the thoughts and intentions of the heart, and even bone and marrow, which are three different components of the process of coming into wholeness. And I'll probably talk about that and share some of that as part of this series, you know.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, all right, I'm going to leave it there. Great seeing you all tonight. Have a really good rest of your day, how much of it you got left, and I'll catch up with you all next time. Okay, all right, God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye. Bye.